Hi, and welcome to Go Be Radiant. I am so glad to be with you today. I just got back from a little vacation with my family and we had so much fun. We went to the beach and we went blueberry picking. First time for me. That was pretty exciting. I actually really liked it. And just had a great time. We made s'mores and just did all kinds of fun little activities together. And it was really a sweet time to be with family. So now I am back in the saddle and I am ready to do our leadership series that I kicked off last week. So last week we talked about the definition of leadership, and I would like to, in case you missed it, I would like to use kind of the broadest definition that we can, because I feel like that helps make it a little bit more applicable in our everyday lives and kind of across the board. And so the leadership definition that we'll be using is leadership is influence. And so by that definition, we're all leaders. And so I think that we will learn so much from the biblical examples that I have for us. So we will start with Deborah. And I don't know if you knew this. This was kind of new information to me. But in the book of Judges, we read about Deborah, and we find out that she was most likely the only female judge in Israel's history. So that's pretty remarkable, I think, and pretty noteworthy. And she was a prophetess. So she had the gift of prophecy that God had given her, which I'm sure enabled her to help do her job a little bit better. So her name actually means bee, like honeybee, which I thought was interesting. And she would sit under the palm of Deborah. She would sit under this big palm tree, and she would hold her court there and settle people's disputes. And what I love about that is that she made herself accessible to her people. And I think that's so important for a leader. And that's actually our first leadership lesson for today, is that leaders need to make themselves accessible to their people. Now, that can be at a lot of different levels, right? So if you're in a job where leadership is in your job description and you have people who are reporting to you, what does that look like? What does it look like to make yourself accessible to your people? Does that look like maybe leaving your door open a little bit more often to your office so that people can ask you questions or get a little bit more direction? Does that mean regular check-ins with your people? Maybe weekly check-ins, or something where you are just accessible to them. And, with Deborah, I just find it so interesting that she wasn't, in some, tower. She wasn't far off and in heavily guarded area, but rather she was available for her people. And I talked about that in a previous blog about how we need to make ourselves available to people. And in leadership, I feel like that's even more important, because we don't want the people that we're leading to get stuck for lack of direction, because they feel like we're either unapproachable or that we just don't have time. They don't want to bother us. It's so much better if they feel like they can come to us with important questions and if they need direction, and then they can get what they need and be more productive. So let's look at a little bit of context of what was going on when Deborah was judging Israel, and then we'll dive into our second leadership lesson. So around the time that she was judging, Israel had been doing evil in the eyes of the Lord, and so he ended up selling them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. Now Sisera, who was the commander of his army, had 900 chariots, a little daunting, and cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. Now the Israelites cried out to God, and he heard them. And so that's a little bit of the story that takes place here and what happens. So God ends up talking to Deborah, because he has a message for someone that she gives to that person, and his name is Barak. So Deborah sends for Barak and says to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go and take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun and lead them to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops, and give him into your hands. So there was this whole, battle that was going to take place. Now, Barak was willing to go and to do this, but only if Deborah would go with him. And I found that so interesting because, he sounds like a pretty capable guy, and he could have probably done it without her, but he wanted her to go. And as a leader, that's really noteworthy to me, that we shouldn't be asking our people to do something that we ourselves are not willing to do. Now, I think about that actually even in my own home. As I try to help lead my children, I want to do it by example. So, for example, when we get home, I ask them to take off their shoes and put them on the shoe rack. Now, if I'm not doing that, that's not a very good example to them, and there's a disconnect in my ability to influence them. It's diminished, right? So I try to put my shoes on the shoe rack and then remind them to put theirs on the shoe rack as well. So I'm leading by example, and therefore my ability to influence is a little bit stronger. Okay, there's more credibility there. So just as if we are trying to influence those around us for Christ, we need to be walking our talk. We need to be showing by example, leading by example, and not just asking people to do things that we ourselves aren't doing. So that's our second leadership takeaway from Deborah. Now, let's keep reading a little bit further, because there's so much more here that we can learn from Deborah. But there's one more takeaway that I have for us from her. Now, a little after the whole scenario takes place and the battle and the bad guy gets killed and all that, by the hands of a woman, nonetheless, if you haven't read the story, jump into Judges chapter 4 and 5. It's worth the read. In Judges 5, there's Deborah's song. And so it's all about this battle that took place. And something really caught my attention in 5:7. She says, until I, Deborah, arose, a mother in Israel. I was like, a mother in Israel. What does that have to do with leading? And so I looked into it a little bit more. And the idea here is that, as a mother, she wants to protect and defend her people. She wants to instruct them and teach them. And one commentator even noted to teach and instruct them in the mind and will of God. How powerful is that, right? What kind of influence did she have on the people of Israel? Really incredible. So, I think about the idea of her wanting to protect and defend her people, right? Just like a mother would want to protect and defend her children. And I thought about when I was the director of human resources in my previous job, sometimes I had to deliver news that I knew would be less than popular, shall we say. And I wasn't always sure how well it would be received, but I always knew that my supervisor had my back and that he would defend me should the need arise. And what that did for me is give me extra courage to do what he'd asked me to do, because I knew that if it didn't get well received, that he would defend me, that he would step in. And that was really encouraging to me. And so, as we think about being in leadership, whether we're leading a small group or in our home or at work or wherever it is we are leading and influencing people, how can we, lead in such a way that really defends and protects our people? Now, the other aspect of this, of leading like a mother, which is why I entitled this post, Lead Like a Mother, is that idea of a maternal affection, which Deborah had for Israel. And so I think what that really comes down to is love. She led out of love, not out of a need for kind of a power trip, right? She led from love. And that's kind of like the quote that I shared last week from John Stott, that leadership, can often be seen as this position of power, when in actuality, it's not about the power, it's about the love, it's about the motivation from which we lead. And so that's kind of our other takeaway here is lead like a mother. Protect, instruct, defend, and have an affection for. Love the people that you're leading. I hope that this has been an encouragement to you, just like it has been to me. And there's one little last thing I want to leave you with that really caught my attention because I really feel like it speaks to our quest to be radiant. In Judges chapter 5, verse 31, there's a little bit before what I'm going to read to you, but it says, but may all who love you be like the sun when it rises in its strength. Now think about the rays of the sun when they first pop up, when you first see them, it's so bright and they just shoot out across the sky. And that's what we've talked about. That's what radiance is, right? We're reflecting God's light, and we want to lead with that kind of strength because we love God and we want to serve Him. So let us be radiant this week and in the weeks ahead as we lead. And we lead a little bit like Deborah. We lead like a mother.